Hello all. In this video, we'll be starting with the function OR. So what does OR do? As we read on the screen, OR checks for multiple logical arguments, and if any one of them is true, then the value of the result will be true, and if all arguments are false, then and then only the resultant or the result value will be false. As you see, the arguments can be single logical value or multiple ones. This is how OR is to be used. Other function that I will be covering is blank. What does is blank do? So is blank will go to a cell reference. The value of that cell reference will be given with the is blank function, and then as an output it will return as true if the cell is empty and false if the cell is not empty. Mind well friends, I use the word empty. I did not say empty text. So there is a difference. As we proceed with this video, everything will be clear to you. So please be aligned with this video, concentrate on the topic and the content. You are watching the YouTube channel, that is me or my channel. I am your host Sushil Shalot. So let's enjoy this video, be set and be aligned with what I am going to describe and define here in this. In this worksheet, you see certain competitive exam and the total number of students those are enrolled against the students numbers which have been or who have been absent for this exam. Well, now how do I find out is blank? So if you see, the total number of students for the computer technology is seen as null or the cell is empty, whereas the absent value for the commerce and finance exam for the students who are absent is again empty. Whereas for quantum physics, both the cells, the total students as well as the absent students numbers are empty. So let's get on to the isBank function and understand how to use it. So I'm going to select all these cells. In the first cell in the formula bar, I'm going to use the function isBlank. So as you see, isBlank checks whether reference is to empty cell and returns true or false. That is what isBlank does. So isBlank is very rarely used independently. It is always nested with some or the other function, and subsequently in this video I'll show how isBlank can be nested with a function if. Let's get on to the isBlank first. So what does isBlank do here? So in this isBlank function, I'm going to give reference to the cell C2. Okay, so what does this function do for us? So now it is going to check the cell C2, and if it is empty, it is going to return the value as true. Well friends, in normal circumstances, I would have used the button enter, but here I'm going to use control enter, and you'll see all the cells which I have selected will get filled with this function is blank. Control enter, and there it is. You see on your screen the first value here is false because the cell C2 is not empty. The third value here is true because the cell C4 is empty, and in the same sense the cell C7 is also empty, so the value at D7 what we see by using the function isBlank is true. So to summarize, isBlank returns the value as true if the referred cell is empty, and it returns false if the referred cell is not empty. Now let us go on to the next part of this video and understand what is empty string. I again repeat, isBlank returns true if the referred cell is empty. Whereas now let's see what happens with empty text string. So as I did earlier, I'm going to select all the cells from this row, this column E, and in the first cell in the function bar, I'm going to say is equal to, say I'm going to refer the cell C2, and is equal to, now I'm going to give double inverted open and double inverted close. That means the referred cell has got an empty text string. If that is correct, then the resultant or the output should be true. And as I explained you, I'm going to use control enter instead of enter so that the function gets copied or gets pasted into all the referred cells. So control enter, and there it is on your screen. You see now it's quite sensible that the first value here is false because the cell C2 has got value 800 in it, whereas the cell E E E4 refers as is equal to, and it returns the value as null because there is empty cell out here. Well, that is how it is referred. And if you see now, both the strings in the is blank column as well as in the empty text column match with each other because they are finding out the cell here C4 and C7 to be empty. Now what is the difference between those two? Subsequently, I'll explain you, but let's get on to the nesting of is blank with the function if. So now what I'm going to do here is, again, as I did in earlier case, I'll select all these cells. In the first cell, I'm going to say is equal to if. Now I'm going to use the if function nested with is blank. So now is blank. So what I'm going to refer here is the cell C2, and well, if the value is equal to the value of is blank is equal to empty cell, what then? Let us get on to that and see how to use it. Well, if it is empty, then by default it will come true, and if it is true, I want a empty cell here as a resultant. So I have used the double inverted open commas and close, and if at all it is false, then what? Then I would like to see the cell C2, right? But instead of C2, now I'm going to use the value. Say for example, I'm going to use the value C2 divided by B2. Well, let me close the parenthesis and use Control Enter. There it is. Well, there was a mistake here. Instead of giving comma, I have given full stop. So be careful. Do not make mistakes while keying the formula or the functions. So you see in here now, I have made the cells in the percentage format, and as you see in the first cell, I'll explain you the context. So what does this do? The function if has got the first value, logical value, that is blank C2. So if at all C2 turns out to be blank, then what? Then the cell F2 should return a empty cell. Otherwise, it should do C2 divided by B2. That means it has to take out the percentage of the absent students with the total number of students. This is what is the context, and this is how is blank is used nested with if. So I have explained you what is blank, and now in this column F, I am explaining you how to use is blank nested with many of the functions in Excel. As example, I used if function. So if we go to the second cell, again the cell C3 is not empty, and therefore the value returned here is 20%. If we go to the next one, we see the C4 cell here is empty, and that's why the resultant value is also a null cell, or I will say a empty text string cell. Mind well, I'm repeating my syllable here, empty text string cell. Well, if we go to the next cell here, what do we see? We see an error div divided by 0 exclamation. Now, if you have observed or if you have watched my video on what are the common errors those happen in Excel and how to avoid them, you must have realized this error is related to division of a number by 0. And that's why if you see in this cell, the cell B5 is 0, and that's why as a resultant we get the error what we see on the screen. Well, next cell what we see is again 3.3% because the cell C6 is not empty, and that's why we get the resultant of C6 divided by B6. The next one, quite logical, the cell C7 is empty as well as B7 is empty. And that's why a resultant we get here is a empty text string. Mind well, I'm repeating empty text string. Now, if I use the empty text string with if again, let me go over here and use the function if. I'm going to use if with the logical value as C2 is equal to empty text string. So if this is true, then return the empty text string, or otherwise find out the value of C2 divided by B2. I'm going to close the parenthesis. Friends, have a look for a couple of seconds and grasp the logic what I have used. So If at all C2 is equal to empty, then return empty text string into this cell. Otherwise, return the value of C2 by P2. And again, I have formatted it as a percentage here. Well, I'm not using the control enter here. I'm going to just drag this cell down so that the formula of the function gets dragged into main things. So friends, if you have seen, both these columns right now show the same values. Now, if I go over here and use a filter now what I'm going to use here as a filter is, suppose the value, if the value in the cell C2, C2 is say less than 750, then what? If it is true, then enter the or return the empty text string. Otherwise, return the value of C2. This is what I'm going to use. So indirectly what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter out all the values which are lesser than 750, and I'm going to say enter and drag this function or this cell down below. Well, as you see, when I drag it, now what we see here is in this cell H6, what we see here is the value is not appearing anyway. That means what has happened here is it has returned the value as empty text string, because the value here in cell C6 is 700, which by default is less than 750. Hence we have got this empty cell. Well, how does this impact? Now I'm again going to use the function isBlank here. Now you know the context, how to use that. What I'll do here is I will first select all these cells, and in the function bar of the first cell I'm going to use the function isBlank. IsBlank C H2. Now I'm going to use the cell H2 and say control enter. As you see, all these cells have turned out to be false because none of these cells appear to be empty. Now I'm going to use the empty text string here. It's the same way. I'm going to use the first cell. I'm going to say empty text string, that is H2 is equal to empty text string. Let us see how it works. So if it is empty, it is going to return true. If it is not empty, it is going to return false. There it is. So now friends, you can very well make out the difference between this column I and J. All this time what I have been talking with you is quite evident here. Now if we see it's blank. Now what it does, it checks for the cell H2, and if it is blank, then it returns the value true. And if at all it is having something in it, it is going to return as false. So you see all these cells show as false. If you go over here and see, by default this is not an empty cell. As I already described and explained you, it is having the empty text string, and that is the reason why the value here has turned out to be true. So friends, now I believe you must have understood what is the difference between is blank and empty text string. Whereas here it was not defining it, because this cell was seen to be blank and this was also seen to be blank. And that's why it returned value is blank, empty text string true, and empty text string true. Well, whereas you can differentiate between the two functions here. Well, with this explanation, I believe you have now understood what is the difference between empty text string and isBlank function. Now let's get on to the next function that is part of our tutorial here, and that function is OR. So what does OR function do? Let me go back to this first cell and revise what we read here. So OR checks whether an argument, any of the arguments are true, any of the arguments. So it can be one argument or multiple arguments. If any of the argument is true, then the value what is returned as output is true, or it returns false only if all the arguments are false. Keep this statement in your mind while we go here and see the illustration of OR function. So I'm going to use the OR function. So in this, I'm going to use OR. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to two cells, that is cell C2 is equal to empty. This is the first logical value. I'll be giving comma, and the next logical value is H2 is equal to empty cell. So if at all any of the value is true, it is going to return the output as true, and if both the values are correct, then it will return as false. So let me enter here. So there it is, it returns false because neither C2 is empty nor H2 is empty, right? So now let me drag this function in the subsequent cells, and now let us see a case of true. So in this case, let us see, or C4 is equal to empty, H4 is equal to empty. Now, any of this is true, the value comes out to be true. So if we go here and say C4, it is empty, and H4 also empty. So in this case, both the values are true, output is true. Had any of these values not been true, even then the value of this resultant cell would have been true. So for example, if we go to this last example, so if we see C7, C7 is empty or H7 is empty. These are the two logical sentences or arguments here. So either or, if C7 is empty, it is going to return true. If H7 is empty, it is going to return true. And if at all C7 as well as S7 is empty, it is going to return true. So if we see here, quite evident, you see the cell C7 as well as H7 both are empty, and hence we see the value here as true. Fine. Well, the same way as I explained you, in this case we had C4 empty as well as H4 empty, and that's why we were getting the value as true in this case. Quite evident. Okay friends, so I hope you understood it. It is quite clear. Now if at all I want to use this OR function nested with any of the functions, for example in this video I'm going to use the function if, so let me use it the same way as we did earlier. So I'm going to use if. The next one what I'm going to use OR. The first logical value I'm going to put in is C2 is equal to empty cell. The next logical value I'm going to put is H2 is equal to empty cell. So if any of this either or is true, then what? Then return the empty cell, or else return the ratio of C2 to B2. Well, I hope this syntax has been cleared or clear to you. Let me again explain you. Let me go and highlight this over here for you to see. So now what does this say? If at all, the logical value of the if function here is OR. In OR, I have used two logical values or the two logical arguments. C2 is equal to empty or H2 is equal to empty. So if any of this is true or both are true, then the value will turn out to be true. And if that has to be true or it turns out to be true, then as output of the if function, we'll get empty cell. And if this is false, then we'll get the ratio. That means if either or rather both are not empty, then we'll get the ratio of C2 to P2. Now, obviously we see on the screen that neither C2, this is C2 over here, C2 is not empty and H2 is not empty. So in our case, we should get for this value of if the ratio of C2 to B2. Now friends, I'm going to use again the control enter to propagate this function into all cells, and there you see on your screen. So the first cell returns the value 11.4%, the second cell for metallurgy returns 20%, the third cell returns as empty because the value of OR here is true, and as we defined it has to be empty. As we defined here it has to be empty. Quite okay and crystal clear. The next value is an error of division by 0, and there it is. We see because the value B2 here is 0. Since B2 is 0, we got the error there as div divided by 0. The next cells what we see here is empty and empty. Quite obvious. In this case, in this case number of L6, we see the cell H6 6 is empty over here, and that's why we got the value as empty. There it is. This is empty, and that's why we got this as empty cell. Quite obvious. So now you must have understood what is the difference between a is blank and empty text string. So here in this case we have empty text string, and that's why we got this cell as empty, right? Then last but not least, here we see that the cell C7, that is over here, is empty, as well as H7 is empty. So the case here is true of OR that we have seen here in previous column, and when this is true, what we are going to get here is an empty cell. This was the value for the 2, correct? Value if true. That is what it is. So friends, I have gone into much detail to elaborate what exactly is the difference between is blank and if, or rather how if can be used nested with is blank. The same way is blank function can be used with many other functions in Excel. I request you to watch many more videos on this and practice it to master it. Well, this is the end of our video here. I hope it has been a useful and worthy video for you, and whatever you have learned you can practice and use it in your applications. As I always say, it is better to subscribe the channel and watch all the videos so that you will be able to work yourselves with your accelerated and excelled qualities and competencies. So keep watching, keep enjoying. Goodbye till the time I'm back with a new one.